Seeking Wisdom Week 11, Biblical Battles, the Book of Joshua. Here's an overview of the Book of Joshua. Joshua, which means God saves, was a star of the sixth book in the Bible. He was also the one Moses chose to replace him and lead God's people into the Promised Land. From this book, many questions arise. The book of Joshua recounts the horrific battles the Israelites endured to reclaim the Promised Land. This was not only a war between the Israelites and its enemies, but also a war between God and Israel's enemies. After each of the victories the Israelites claimed, God commanded them to exterminate all the inhabitants, animals, and houses of the captured cities, also known as the command of exterminate. Some of the questions coming from the reading of this book are, why did our merciful God declare war and exterminate other nations? Was this really God that commanded his people to do this? In chapter 10, verses 12 to 13, Joshua orders the sun to stand still. But as science has proven, the sun does not rotate. The earth revolves around the sun. So what did this mean? Let's see if we can find the answers by exploring this book more deeply. When we look at the content of the book of Joshua, we need to look at a few main areas. First, we will look at the structure of the book of Joshua that is divided into three main parts. The capture of the land covered in chapters 1 to 12, territorial division, which is covered in chapters 13 to 21, and Joshua's last discourse, which is explained in chapters 22 to 24. In chapters 6 to 11, this is where the fighting took over. The front is where Joshua and the Israelites began to attack Jericho, then was quickly able to defeat the city of Ai because of the sin of Achan and the punishment he was given. But they also won and destroyed the city by command. On the second front heading south, in a rare case, Joshua made a covenant with the people of Gibeon, which quickly prompted the king of Jerusalem to immediately establish a coalition against Gibeon. But Joshua won a great victory and captured the southern cities. On the third front, which was heading north to Palestine, Joshua faced another alliance. He eventually burned down this city too, which was controlled by the king of Hazor. Of the three battles, the biggest battle was the one in the middle that occupied the city of Jericho. This part of the lesson will cover the part of the book about when the Israelites were crossing the Jordan River to conquer the city of Jericho. When Jericho reported the favorable situation, Joshua decided to take immediate action. The next morning, he ordered the camp from Shittim to go to the Jordan River. Sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. This command shows a concept of war different from that of today. It is a sacred act of holiness. People are convinced that God fights for them and that the Ark of the Covenant is God's presence. They prepare for battle as performing a ritual of worship to keep them holy for the ritual, that is, to abstain from spouses. The shout of battle is also of religious significance and is part of the ritual of offering the ark. The book states that the waters flowing from above stood still, rising up in a single heap far off at Adam, the city that is beside Zarethan, while those flowing toward the Sea of the Arabah, the Dead Sea, were wholly cut off. While all Israel were crossing over on dry ground, the priests who bore the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stood on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan until the entire nation finished crossing over the Jordan. On the seventh day they rose early, at dawn, and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times, and at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." According to the command, everything in the city shall be destroyed for the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the spies that were sent. As for you, keep away from the things devoted to destruction, so as not to covet and take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel an object for destruction, bringing trouble upon it. But all silver and gold and vessels of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord. they shall go into the treasury of the Lord." So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpets, they raised a great shout, and the wall fell down flat. So the people charged straight ahead into the city and captured it. Then they devoted to destruction by the edge of the sword all in the city, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys. As you know, there was a command to destroy and exterminate other nations. So let's go back to one of the questions we had at the beginning of the lesson. Why would a merciful God declare war and exterminate other nations? Have you heard the word Hiram? Hiram is translated as sacrificial destruction, meaning to devote to God. This is an element in which every loot or treasure attained during battle becomes a true possession of the victorious deity. Israel believed that Hiram in battle was the abandonment of all spoils of war to God, in which humans and animals killed and valuables should be left in the house of God as a gift. This action also guaranteed Israel's loyalty to God and ensured the Israelites were not adversely affected by the Gentiles and the evil gods. Victory is for God, and everything in the city must be dedicated to God. This creates a dual meaning of religion and humanitarian in the avoidance of greed or looting of the winning party. When we look at some of the victories, we must discuss miracles. For example, in the battle to capture the city of Ai and the central region, 5 alliance kings were defeated. It was during these battles that Joshua's famous miracle, the sun stands still, happens. As for the sun stopping, it should be noted that the ancients did not understand the universe as we do today. The ancient people believed the sun moved while the earth stood still, not the other way around. So if we look into the miracle, some people think that the sun had set, but it had just rained, so the light remained due to the reflection of the sun. Others thought that the sun did not stop, but clouds covered the sun, making it easy for Joshua's army to chase the enemy. But we must never forget what the author wants us to remember. This was God's intervention, and that made victory possible. So when we look at how this book of Joshua compares to our everyday life, or what lessons we can take from this book, let's look at a few things in particular. Let's begin with loyalty. The book of Joshua does not promote violence or war. The purpose of this book is to support God's loyalty to his people in giving the promised land to them. Loyalty is the main point of the book of Joshua and shows that what God promised in the Pentateuch has now come true. The Canaanite land now belongs to the children of Israel. Next, have you ever heard the phrase, "Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left"? This means believe God, the one God that freed them from slavery and led them into the promised land. This becomes a valuable lesson to us today, especially those that question whether God really exists. Some wonder if God will be with us when we are struggling, if God hears us when we talk to him, or why he is silent when we need him most. The book of Joshua shows us that God is faithful and with us in every aspect and event of our lives, including joy, sadness, happiness, suffering, success, and even failure. The most important thing we must remember is the Lord is in the midst of his people. When the Israelites were crossing the Jordan River, priests carried the Ark of the Covenant, which could also be called the Lord's presence, to allow the people to pass safely. Joshua, the figure of Christ, is the one who brought the people to the promised land, our heaven. And the crossing of the Jordan River is the model of baptism, our regeneration through the water and the Spirit. The Jordan River that Joshua led the Israelites through is one and the same that Jesus was baptized in. The water in the Jordan River, which was purified by Jesus, showed he was no longer a sign of the presence, but he is God. Through him, we all go from the abyss of death and sin to eternal life, the everlasting promised land that God promises each of us. Here is a story of the city of Ai captured by a stratagem and destroyed. The Lord said to Joshua, "Do not fear or be dismayed. Take all the fighting men with you and go up now to Ai. See, I have handed over to you the king of Ai with his people, his city, and his land. Set an ambush against the city behind it." So Joshua and all the fighting men set out to go up against Ai. Joshua chose 30,000 warriors and sent them out by night with the command, "You shall lie in ambush against a city behind it. Do not go very far from the city, but all of you stay alert. I and all the people who are with me will approach the city. When they come out against us, as before, we shall flee from them. They will come out after us until we have drawn them away from the city. While we flee from them, you shall rise up from the ambush and seize the city. And when you have taken the city, you shall set the city on fire, doing as the Lord has ordered. See, I have commanded you." So Joshua sent them out, and they went to the place of ambush and lay between Bethel and Ai, to the west of Ai. In the morning, Joshua took about 5,000 men. He set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. So they stationed the forces, the main encampment that was north of the city and its rear guard west of the city. When the king of Ai saw this, he hurried out early in the morning to the meeting place facing the Arabah to meet Israel in battle, but he did not know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. And Joshua and all Israel made a pretense of being beaten before them and fled in the direction of the wilderness. So all the people who were in the city were called together to pursue them. They left the city open and pursued Israel. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Stretch out the sword that is in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it into your hand." And Joshua stretched out the sword that was in his hand toward the city. As soon as he stretched out his hand, the troops in ambush rose quickly out of their place and rushed forward. They entered the city, took it, and at once set the city on fire. So when the men of Ai looked back, the smoke of the city was rising to the sky. They had no power to flee this way or that, for the people who fled to the wilderness turned back against the pursuers. When Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city and that the smoke of the city was rising, then they turned back and struck down the men of Ai. So they were surrounded by Israelites, some on one side and some on the other. And Israel struck them down until no one was left who survived or escaped. But the king of Ai was taken alive and brought to Joshua. When Israel had finished slaughtering all the inhabitants of Ai in the open wilderness where they pursued them, and when all of them to the very last had fallen by the edge of the sword, all Israel returned to Ai and attacked it with the edge of the sword. The total of those who fell that day, both men and women, was 12,000, all the people of Ai. So Joshua burned Ai and made it forever a heap of ruins as it is to this day. And he hanged the king of Ai on a tree until evening. And at sunset Joshua commanded, and they took his body down from the tree, threw it down at the entrance of the gate of the city, and raised stones, which stands there to this day. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this week's lesson. Please join us next Friday for our new video. The answers to this week's questions will be revealed in next week's video. Remember, every Friday at 7 p.m., the Seeking Wisdom Challenge will be posted on YouTube and Facebook. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, or subscribe to our channel. If you have any questions, leave them in the comment section below. Thank you for watching, and we wish you a wonderful weekend full of grace and joy.